All right, so we're talking about mounting your controller. It's important to make sure that when you go and install a new controller, you pick a smart place for your controller to be mounted. You want to make sure it's in an area that's easy to get to. You want to make sure you're not climbing over a bunch of filters, pieces of equipment. You can see here, we got plenty of space here, even with the pipe here to get in here. So this is essentially easy to service. It's always smart to think about, even if you're just a builder, you want to think about who's coming in afterwards to service the pool. Whether if it's a local service company, whether if it's the maintenance person at the actual apartment complex. You just want to make sure this controller is easy to get to and it can be serviced. You also want to think about, all right, is there any other major pieces of electrical close by to it, such as a main sub panel or main breaker panel? This controller utilizes an ORP sensor. The ORP sensor runs off of millivolts. Millivolts can be very sensitive, and if you install this controller, whether if it's directly next to or on the opposite side of the wall of a main sub panel, it could cause some electrical interference with the sensors. So you always want to make sure you're trying to keep this controller away from any main sub panel. As you can see here, there's no sub panel close by. We do have this electrical conduit here, but that's not much that's going to cause any interference with the controller. The other thing I cannot stress enough is when you go and mount this controller on the wall, make sure it's level. All right, don't have it cockeyed. Make sure you have a level of some sort to make sure the controller is level. And a lot of times people make one big mistake. They mount the controller on the wall, then they go and they put their probes in. These probes, they come in a box, 2 small brown boxes. Don't throw these boxes away. All right, you have your pH probe, you have your ORP probe. Whatever you do, don't mount this controller and then go put these sensors in, because these sensors come in a cap that has water in them. These sensors cannot remain dry for more than 20 to 30 minutes at a time. People make the mistake often of hanging this controller on the wall, putting the sensors in, and then by the time they go hang the chemical feed pumps, run the tubing, etc., it's an hour afterwards and the sensors are dry, they're shot, and they're going to need to be replaced. Unfortunately, that's not covered under warranty. Okay, so the very last thing you do is you put these sensors in. All right, hang your control unit, hang your chemical feeders, run your sample lines, get the pump to actually come on and make sure you can get water in this sample vessel before you put these probes in. This is the very last step, is putting the sensors in. Because if you don't and you put it in, these sit dry for an extended period of time, they're going to be shot, they're going to have to be replaced. One thing to keep in mind when you're mounting the control unit on the wall is where's your nearest electrical receptacle, all right? You can see we have one right here, very close by to this control unit. The controllers do come pre-wired for 120 volt. They have a 120 volt standard plug. They need to be plugged into a 120 volt GFCI receptacle. These controllers can be converted to 230 volt. It's very rare we ever see that. Just know that these controllers do come preset for 120 volt applications. You have your 120 volt pigtail coming off right here. We plug that directly in to an outlet and we're good to go. An additional thing to keep in mind when mounting your control unit is where your control unit is mounted in relationship to your chemical feed pumps. All right, mounting your chemical feed pumps can sometimes be tricky because you got to look at where your chemical feed tanks are, which could be located potentially in another room, as well as how long the tubing is. These chemical feeders, they usually come with 1/4 inch tubing. Some other chemical feeders come with larger diameter tubings, but these tubings are 1/4 inch. One important thing when mounting these controllers is, since this sample vessel is going to have water flowing through it, this is where our sample lines go to. We never really want to mount a controller or a feeder directly underneath of here, because if this ever gets a leak, we don't want it dripping down into the actual feeder because it could cause damage to the feeder. So it's always important to keep this space beneath the sample vessel free from any electronic components. And same thing with the chemical feed pumps. We don't want these chemical feed pumps hanging over top of any pumps or salt systems, anything that these could potentially cause damage to if we did get a leak in the actual roller tubes themselves or in the connections here. We don't want any chemicals dripping down on any pieces of equipment. It can cause some serious damage. So it's always important to think about where we're going to mount the controller as well as the chemical feed pumps. Good news is these chemical feed pumps, they are 120 volt. They plug directly into the 120 volt female pigtails that are coming off this control unit. There are color-coded sample rings on here to identify which feed pump plugs into which female pigtail coming off. Of course, one pigtail is going to be for your pH feed, the other one's going to be for your ORP feed. But it's important to always think about, all right, where am I going to mount these pumps? Where does it make the most sense? Because again, you have a cord on these as well, so this cord's going to have to reach these pigtails, and you probably are not going to want to have an extension cord running across the room. So you're usually going to extend the actual suction and actual return tubing for these chemical feeders to the actual pipe.